White House senior advisor Stephen Miller in 2017, mounting an authoritarian defense of President Trump's immigration policy. Miller was arguing against federal judges' authority to review executive actions such as the administration's travel ban that he helped, that's Miller, helped create. The hardline policy advisor is now reportedly one of the driving forces behind President Trump's leadership purge at the Department of Homeland Security. And just moments ago, outgoing Secretary of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen tweeted the acting deputy Claire Grady offered the president her resignation effective tomorrow. So here again, the president gets to pick his person. The Wall Street Journal reports administration officials said President Trump recently told Miller, quote, "You're in charge." Steve Miller's in charge. The Axios reports that Miller is a part of the president's plans to make new hardline border policies, adding that sources close to outgoing Homeland Security Secretary Nielsen tell us that Trump and Steve Miller have called for changes that are legally dubious and would therefore be operationally ineffective. For more, I'm joined by Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for Axios, and author Ron Reagan. You know, I hesitate to attack everything about Trump because I'm not sure the Democrats have offered a clear alternative that the public should understand in border policy. But family separation is a political, moral, and every other kind of a human disaster. Why does Steve Miller like it and want to bring it back? Jonathan.
Stephen Miller views the separation of families as a deterrent. And you have to remember the zero tolerance policy that Jeff Sessions announced. There was no secret about why they announced it. They said it. They said it out loud explicitly that it was a deterrent, that it would have a deterrent effect.
So a mommy and a daddy down in Central America in a dangerous situation says, do we make a chance? Do we gather our money together, what little we have, and make a run for the U.S. border and asylum, knowing that once we get there, our kids will be taken away from us?
Yes.
That's what that's the choice.
That is the deterrent.
Ron, that sounds like Sophie's Choice stuff to me.
Well, it does. It's hard for people like us, I think, and I'll include Jonathan in this because I'm sure he's a decent fellow. It's hard for us to look at a situation like taking babies away from their parents, throwing them into cages, and maybe never reuniting them because you lose track of them. It's hard for us to look at that and say, well, I guess it's tough, but it's acceptable. We find this appalling, absolutely appalling, and it's a little confusing to see a president apparently maybe again embracing this policy. Why would they do that? The optics are awful. Politically, it has to be a disaster. But I think Trump sees it differently, and I think his base sees it differently. I think he knows that as far as they're concerned, as long as it's little brown babies that are being thrown in cages, they don't really care. It's fine with them. They think it's tough.
You think it's that way with him? Really that bad?
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I think so. I think he's entirely cynical about this.
Well, I think people don't, people don't trust governments to take care of their kids. And the idea people don't even check their luggage at the airport anymore because they want to hold on to it. The idea of saying your kid's going to be returned to you in X many weeks, when in fact some of them weren't returned, as Ron's right. Some of them didn't get back to the parents.
I don't think it's clear at all that they're returning to the zero tolerance policy. They've certainly discussed it. Stephen Miller.
What is zero tolerance?
Zero tolerance is they prosecute everyone, which results in family separations. What they are doing and what they intend to do is what amounts to the most aggressive, hardline immigration policy changes that we've seen since Trump was elected. And mostly, it makes it much more difficult. They want to make it much more difficult for people to seek asylum in America. That is the core. It's not about the wall. It's about asylum.
Well, today the president denied he's trying to separate families again, but defended the policy's effectiveness and falsely blamed his predecessor, Obama. Let's watch.
President Obama had child separation. Take a look. The press knows it. You know it. We all know it. I'm the one that stopped it. President Obama had child separation. Now, I'll tell you something. Once you don't have it, that's why you see many more people coming. They're coming like it's a picnic because let's go to Disneyland. President Obama separated children. They had child separation. I was the one that changed it.
You know, Ron, he's speaking with a forked tongue again, an old cowboy movie expression. But the fact is, he says it's a bad thing to do to separate. Obama did it, but I'm doing it because it works. I mean, what is it? Is he condemning the policy of family separation or celebrating it because he's going to bring it back?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, you've pointed out that what he said made no sense. I mean, he's essentially blaming Obama for having a child separation policy, which is technically true, but not really. And then he's saying but this is the only thing that works. Well, so was Obama good or was he bad? And did he make a mistake by stopping the child separations then? Is that what he's suggesting?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but but it was a little
Well,
confusing.
the country's divided. I think that the president's going to say come next election, I don't care who the nominee is, the Democratic Party, he's going to say an open borders policy is against. So either like what I'm doing, which is thuggish, or get nothing done, force the American voter to go, do I want something done, which is thuggish, which is family separation, which is immoral to be, or the Democrats, I can't quite figure out what their alternative is. That's what Trump's quite happy with, apparently, that choice.
Yes, and Trump is willing to go further than any political candidate that we've seen. Like, he wants to, when someone comes to this country from Central America, some of these impoverished places, they have what's called a credible fear interview, and they describe their fears. Trump wants it to make it much harder for them to get through that interview, basically. So he is willing to go places. He wants to speed up deportations. He's willing to go places that we've not seen modern politicians go on this.
What did Kirsten Nielsen do wrong? Why was she sacked?
In Trump's mind, she did not use executive power aggressively enough to get rid of people, to stop asylum seekers seeking asylum in this country. His view was that she was weak, that she didn't do what she needed to do. The counter view is every time Trump has tried to do one of these unilateral policies, almost without exception, that's very aggressive, the courts have enjoined him. And so everything is caught up in the courts. And I think where we're heading now is basically 18 months of litigation, because it's
well, he
all
may like
through
that.
the branch.
He may want to have Steve Miller fighting the bad guys, the courts as he sees. Anyway, today, Iowa Republican Chuck Grassley was asked about Stephen Miller's influence over administration policy.
I have no way of measuring it, except I don't see a lot of accomplishments that an advisor in the White House has accomplished for the president on immigration.
You know, it's interesting, Ron, to watch the sort of reasonable Republicans like Mitt Romney, who can be a mixed bag, let's face it. But on this, I watched him on Meet the Press this Sunday. He sounds like a reasonable conservative about what you do. He was for E-Verify, stopping illegal hiring, the usual sort of menu of ways to stop illegal immigration. And he didn't seem to be crazy. And I think this guy, Grassley's never been accused of crazy. He could be an SOB sometimes. He's a tough customer. I don't mean SOB. I mean really tough. The guy's tough. And yet he doesn't like the way Trump's doing stuff.
Right. Well, he's not going to get a job in the Trump administration. He's not crazy. I guess that's you've got to be that. Listen, if Stephen Miller wants to be in charge of immigration, if Trump wants Stephen Miller to be in charge of immigration, let's make him in charge of immigration. Let's make him the director of Homeland Security. Let's give him a real title. Let's bring him before Congress and see if he can get confirmed. You know, Stephen Miller he used to go to a high school near where I grew up, Santa Monica High School in Los Angeles, SAMO we used to call it. He distinguished himself there by being an obnoxious racist. He has been this apparently his entire life. And now he's going to be in charge of our immigration policy.
He would say, throw trash on the ground so the working people have to clean it up.
Yes.
It's not your job to be neat. Make them work for their money. What a mentality that guy has.
Well, yes.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.